Good morning, everyone, and welcome
Einen
to
schönen guten
Artificial
Morgen und
Stupidity.
herzlich
We are
willkommen
here on
beim
stage
Panel
with some
Artificial
amazing artists,
Stupidity.
researchers, and scientists to discuss some
Wir
of
sind
their
hier
practices
zusammengekommen,
and how
Künstler und
we all use
Wissenschaftler,
AI.
um
I'm Petra
über den
XO,
Einsatz von
also an
AI,
interdisciplinary
künstliche
artist, and I've
Intelligenz
been
zu
working with
sprechen.
AI
Wir
for the
haben hier
last year and a
interdisziplinäre
half,
Künstler
and
hier
I'm very
zu
interested
Besuch
in
und ich bin sehr gespannt auf die Beiträge, wo uns die Künstler über ihre Methoden, ihre Praktiken sprechen werden. Wir wollen hier nicht so sehr definieren, was Artificial Intelligence eigentlich ist, sondern wir wollen die Einzelheiten eher kennenlernen, die verschiedenen Methoden und die unterschiedlichen Perspektiven. Ich darf die Teilnehmer vorstellen. Artemi-Maria Gioti,
Moisés Horta Valenzuela, and Braga. So if you can each just briefly introduce yourselves, your specific practice, and how you use AI.
Yes, so good morning from me. I am a composer and artistic researcher currently based in Graz, Austria. And my interest in AI revolves around mainly the shortcomings, the limitations of AI. So I'm really interested in exploring the limits of machine learning algorithms. I'm also interested in how AI can expand or can help me change my artistic practice. So I'm not so much interested in using AI to produce material, to generate material autonomously, but I'm thinking about what does it mean to compose in the era of AI? What does it mean to compose for AI? So my practice really revolves around music pieces, compositions for musicians, playing acoustic instruments, and AI, interactive computer music systems that can listen to the musicians and respond in a musically meaningful way. What that means, what is a musically meaningful response, of course, depends on its specific piece. So what I'm doing in my practice is, instead of composing a fixed sequence of sounds that is left then to the performer to realize, I'm composing interactions between an intelligent machine and a musician. So I am composing the dynamics of the interaction, the behaviors that drive the AI, but not necessarily the sound result per se. So this also means that each performance can be completely different than another performance. And what interests me in that as a composer is that it completely changes my role in this process, my task. What is the role of the composer in this process if not to write a fixed piece? So my role sort of shifts from composing sequences of sounds to composing behaviors and interactions.
Ali?
Good morning. My name is Ali Nikrang. I am a key researcher at Ars Electronica Future Lab. My research topic is creative intelligence. It is about AI and creativity and how we can use AI for creative applications. It is also important how we can enhance and personalize and lead the results through collaboration and interaction with human users. And I have my background in both in computer science and in composition, in music. I studied composition and also piano playing at University Mozarteum in Salzburg, and I also studied computer science at this university here, Johannes Kepler University. And we are currently developing an AI-based composition system called Recherca, which is trained with 25,000 pieces of music. And we also use the system for different and several applications and events during the festival this year. The focus is actually in our research not only the technology, but also we are interested in the impacts of the technology for artists and for the society.
Thank you. Moisés.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Moisés. I'm a Tijuana not based artist. I'm currently based in Berlin, but I'm a sound artist, self-taught technologist, and my approach to artificial intelligence is to explore unrepresented forms in the research, especially talking about neural network sound synthesis. So my work really revolves on the atomic level of sound and having AI autonomous systems and non-autonomous systems to enhance and create new musical forms. So, for example, I come from the borderland of Tijuana, which is a very interesting place because you have two different epistemologies in tension, like the Western epistemology and then, let's say, Latin American epistemology of thinking. So within AI research and my own research into these practices, I see that there is very lack of representation of other cultures which are non-Western. So it tends to be something that I try to change in my practice and to kind of change this narrative within artificial intelligence. So I see artificial intelligence as a tool mostly that can augment our own practices and can, let's say, create new imaginaries. So not as a way to replace a human, but more to augment the creativity of artists. So yeah, that's mostly what I'm working on.
Thank you. Alex?
And I completely agree with his point of view. I'm Alex Braga. Hi, I'm an artist, and I just released a record with K7 that it's called Split Machine, that it's made through my artificial intelligence that is called AMINT, which is an artificial intelligence that it's basically works in real time to augment the powers of an artist, and that's what I do. I play augmented music, and I'm not really interested in artificial intelligence. I'm interested in the human being and the artist. So the only thing that interests me is in this thing is the way that artificial intelligence can enhance and augment the capabilities and the possibilities of mankind and artists. In this case, we started also teaching artificial intelligence in the classical conservatories in Italy. We started in Santa Cecilia, which is one of the most ancient classical institutions in Europe, and we started doing so, meaning we put artificial intelligence at stake with cellos, lyrical singing, classical piano, and all the other instruments, because it is an instrument to help people mastering a new kind of way of composing and playing music.
Very cool, thank you. What really fascinates me about all of you here is you have such very specific ways of using AI into your practice. And through my own experimentation and research, I found really interesting and unpredictable and unexpected ways of how these experimentations have changed my perspective of what AI actually is. And currently we still have a lot of fear around AI because of the narratives of media and how it's pushed forward to people. So I'm really curious to know, through your experiments, what has been the most interesting discovery through your practice? And can you share a few words of how that's impacted your work? Artemi, would you like to start?
First? Yeah. So I think one of the most interesting experiments I've done with AI is an ongoing experiment. It's the piece that we will hear in the concert later. The piece is called Bias. And it's a comment on the unattainability of objectivity, both in human aesthetic preferences and in AI, in machine learning algorithms. So what I did for this piece is I recorded a lot of improvised material with the help of the clarinetist, and then I just split this recording into shorter fragments, and I rated these fragments on a scale from 1 to 5 based on which I liked best. So really I tried to give my own aesthetic preferences to the neural network as a reference for it to learn to predict my preferences. So the idea here is that learning from all this material, the neural network then will hear a new sound and be able to tell how much I like it, so how much it corresponds to my aesthetic preferences. However, of course, what happens when you work with machine learning is that the algorithm will also make some arbitrary assumptions about the data, and that's called AI bias. That's why the piece is called Bias. So the neural network, to some extent, captures some of my aesthetic preferences, some of my own aesthetic bias, and to some extent it creates its own bias. So that was really a very interesting process for me, because what came out from this process was not really sort of a simulation of my preferences, but a hybrid a new form of agency, a hybrid human-machine agency. So the algorithm sort of became its own thing. And in this piece, because of that, it really helped me expand my practice and understand what I'm doing better, and also really redefine what I'm doing. So for this particular piece, I did something that I never do. So the electronics in this piece, the sounds that the computer plays in this piece, are not composed by me. So none of the sound material comes from me, but the computer collects material in its interactions with the musician. So every time the piece is being performed or rehearsed, the computer sort of expands its vocabulary, and it adds new sounds to its vocabulary based on its preferences. So it will just collect sounds that it likes. So for me, this was really a completely different way to compose music. So I didn't really even provide the sounds for it. So everything started from an AI, everything started from exploring this concept of AI bias, and it gave me the opportunity to do something that I could not have done otherwise. And that's where I see the potential in AI, that it enables new approaches, new artistic practices that would not be possible without these tools.
That's really cool, and I really enjoyed what you said earlier about showing the limitations of this technology, which is also another aspect of what's happened in the media with the hype around AI that focuses heavily on the possibilities. But I really feel the importance of us here as artists is to really use this technology and show what are the limitations and how do we work within them. And Ali, you also have many examples here at the festival, and I also saw you perform live. Can you explain a little bit more about how you specifically use your AI and how it's augmented or changed how you work?
Sure. So what is fascinating for me is how simple actually these models are working. Because what we have is the AI system, they are able to, to learn or be trained with very, very large amount of data. In my case, we had 25,000 pieces of music. And it is very interesting to see that they develop their own perspective on music, and how, because they have to learn how to compose music. And it is also very fascinating. All what they have to learn is actually to predict or to generate the next note, given all the previous notes in the piece of music. So it sounds very unintuitive to human musicians, but we all know that these models are very successful because it's the same idea that we also have in natural language processing. We all know GPT-2, GPT-3, these models are very, very powerful, and this is the same idea. And it is also, the idea, the assumption behind using AI to compose is actually that if you have a model that is able or capable of generating music that sounds natural, human, and emotional, like the music in the training set. So the model must have learned something about music, because otherwise it wouldn't be possible. So some essential understanding of music must be in the model. And actually, this is a new perspective on music. So this is, I agree with you also, because if we investigate the model, so we can actually learn something about music, because it's the bridge between music and technology. So we investigate an AI model, but we learn something why music works and how music works, because AI systems, they just learn the statistical patterns of the data. But sometimes or very often actually, when you are composing with them, so they are fascinating results. And so you ask yourself, how is it possible? Because this is a machine, it has no understanding, no imagination of our emotions, of our worlds. And how is it possible that something is generated that is so emotional and is able to trigger emotional responses in us? And it is something that fascinates me. And even if I have been working with these models since years, it is still a strange feeling if I listen to an AI composition and I feel the emotions in it, because I exactly know that the model is actually very simple. It just learned to predict the next note. And nonetheless, it works. So this is what for me personally is very fascinating.
Very cool, thank you. That was a really easy to digest way to understand how you do such complex, well, what seems very complex, but it's very nice to actually hear it in a way that's very understandable. And Moisés, I've seen you do AI-generated DJ sets too. You created a very unique performance here, specifically for Ars. Can you share some of your specific ways of using AI?
Yeah, of course. So for the past couple of years, I've been working with a very specific kind of neural network algorithm, which is the generative adversarial network, which is quite problematic if you think about it, architecture in the sense, because basically you have two AIs competing for each other. One of them is looking at the real data and the other one is generating data from scratch. So they're kind of fooling each other. So in my work, I like to unpack these very essential concepts in the research that are basically based on adversary instead of cooperative ways of thinking, right? So this in itself is something that I wanted to unpack. So for my performance here in Ars Electronica, I basically work mostly with GANs and also with GPT-2. It's called Nelcotoni in Cuicatl, which means amulets in poetry in Nahuatl language. So basically this performance is based on three generative AI systems. Narrow AI, let's actually talk about specifics, not artificial general intelligence, which is a completely different thing. So you have the visual aspect, which is doing, it's a GAN trained on pre-Hispanic artifacts. And then you have a male GAN, which is doing sound synthesis at the raw waveform level. So the idea is that the transduction of these visual GANs, which are doing these interpolations between these imagined or hallucinated pre-Hispanic artifacts, are actually driving the sound. So I built a system where I transformed the pixels into synthesis data, so raw synthesis data, which is just basically noise. And then I have another algorithm, a neural network, which converts this random noise and tries to convert it into a corpus of music, which is taken from pre-Hispanic sound forms, to not say music, it's mostly ritualistic percussive music. So I'm quite interested in this kind of imagined futures, right? Because when we imagine, talk about AI, this imagined future usually is very Western, and there's very lack of representation, right? So my idea is not to perpetuate ancient epistemologies, but actually to bring them into the future and to have like a more diverse future that is not based on one specific way of thinking about AI, or this drive of AI being something that is going to overhaul humanity, you know? So this kind of plays into the talk that we're having right now about unpacking these ideas. So just to sum it up, this research work comes from last year I released an album called Transfiguración, which means transfiguration. It's using this same algorithm, Melgan VC, to transfigure an album from a Mexican artist called Antonio Cepeda, which is like a all-acoustic pre-Hispanic percussion album, and to transfigure it into my own body of music. So basically it's this idea of creating a fictional link, or a kind of like a futuristic kind of continuum between ancient epistemologies and high-tech modern computing. So this is what I feel is quite interesting for me in AI, to create different narratives rather than create AI as a being in itself, right? So it's more about which narratives get represented within this, because AI is a tool, basically. And with tools to create art, you create certain stories. So which stories are being told is kind of what is interesting for me.
Very cool. And it seems every time you do it, you discover something very interestingly different to what you did before it. Cool. And Alex, you have a very different way of using your AI, quite different to the rest of us here. I saw your performance last night using your real-time AI generative system. Can you tell us a little bit about your process and what's your most interesting discovery?
Yes, I think well, my starting point was not AI, but was the idea of creation and of composing. And so that's why I figured, after working so many years with AI, that AI cannot and should not compose or generate art, because no matter how performing an algorithm is, an algorithm will never be able to understand why that specific interval of notes is meaningful to life, to the universe, and to a human being. So what we can create with artificial intelligence is just super, very performing craftsmanship, which is a pale imitation of art. But artificial intelligence is never going to be able to put meaning behind notes. And meaning behind notes is the sacred principle of creation and of music and art. So the way I created a mint is a way that was, the principle was to enable an artist to explore in real time the endless possibilities that you don't have in real life in a studio or on a stage. So a mint, it doesn't have any data set, it's not prefed with nothing, knows nothing about music, knows nothing about harmony, knows nothing about anything. It's just a super powerful, low-level neural network that enables you in that specific moment to beat time, the linearity of time, meaning that every time you press and you play something, it delivers that something augmented to plus infinity, depending on how many machines you can put in series and how many hands do you have on stage. That, for me, is an approach that enables the artist to deliver the emotion which the artist knows the meaning through a lenses that augments to plus infinity the emotion, that kind of meaning. But the machine itself doesn't do anything. You know, you saw the performance. If I don't play, the AI is completely silent, because and that is the way it should be, because it should not be playing, because otherwise it would not be creating anything meaningful to me, to the audience, and to the universe and the world, because a computer is a computer. So a computer knows nothing about love, fear, joy, death, loss, sex, nothing. It has never been left by a girlfriend or a boyfriend. It has never been weeping a night because something is going wrong in his life. It has never been depressed. So the whole thing about art is giving a significant to this kind of emotions, which is a meaning. The big risk with AI is that we give out only a significant with no meaning behind. And if we do that, we're fucked, because there's nothing behind that. You know, it's just a show-off of capabilities of what a computer can do. We all know a computer is powerful. We all know a computer can do a lot of computational things, but these are computational things. I mean, I never cried seeing a computer doing calculations. I never got sexed up seeing a computer doing processing or rendering a file. I mean, it's just process. It's a very aseptic thing. So the way I think this is just, AI is a very powerful tool, but it has to be used in a very specific way. Otherwise, we run the big risk of losing the role of artists and art in the universe. And if we lose that, we're doomed.
Thank you. And I think this is what brings so much value of us as artists to play with these tools, right? And to share what we discover with these experiments. And I think that technology and the narrative of AI in media has kind of lost that kind of like depth of really looking underneath and revealing what these experiments actually show us about what it means to be human and our interaction with these technologies. And I think with like sci-fi and TV shows and movies and like the cultural kind of narrative of like these big imagined futures of doom has really played a big role on our perception of AI. And we are here to not so much combat it, but just show a little bit more rich examples and to bring new narratives. The other aspects of AI, which I find really fascinating, is how it's created this really big focus on the kind of like automation aspect of it. And I often get asked, isn't creating with AI a lazy way of creating? And somehow we've lost on this narrative of like all the energy, the research that goes into building these systems, and then that process of building and then having the human involvement in it. And as far as I know from all the conversations I've had with other fellow creatives, is that everyone tends to be more of a control freak, and true freedom is having more creative control. So furthering this discussion of kind of demystifying this hype, I'd love to hear each of you express a few words of how do you see the role of human and creativity with AI and within the limitations of where we are now, and where do you see it going next?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Of course, it's very hard to know. We can only guess at this point. But I think that what's the most interesting thing about AI, and which has a lot of potential, at least in my view, is using AI in a more human-in-the-loop approach. So I think that the potential of AI lies in human-computer co-creativity rather than autonomously creative systems. So for me, it's when the human and the machine come together that really interesting things happen. Because just letting the machine create something on its own is just an imitation, as Alex said. I mean, the machine is just going to produce probably worse versions of human-written music, but it's never going to innovate. It's never going to do anything that will change the course of music history. So, you know, innovation requires general intelligence, and general intelligence that is embedded in a social reality. So creativity is not just about creating random variations of previously written music or deviating from previously written music. It's a practice that is embedded in everyday life, in all aspects of life. So innovation is driven by changes in society, technology, economy, whatever that might be. So I think Georgina Bourne wrote in an article a few years ago, and I'm paraphrasing here, but she wrote that every musical work exists in continuation of a musical past and anticipation of a musical future. And I think it's this anticipation that machines cannot do so far and won't be able to do for a long time, probably. So for me, what is interesting and where I see the future in this field is in this symbiosis between human and machine, where the human has the creative vision and the machine contributes through its own very specific, very narrow, yet interesting type of intelligence.
Thank you. I agree. I think AI's created a new path for us to get even more specific, actually, with how we decide to use it, because the possibilities are so wide and infinite. Ali, would love to hear.
I also see the future of AI-based music composition in collaboration with humans. because in my opinion also there is no art without human involvement, and the problem for me personally is the intention, because there is no creation without intention. Even if you look at the very first cave paintings in human history, we can find the intention to draw something and to share the meaning of these hunting scenes with the society at that time. And for art it's much more important. So I think it is my personal opinion about this, but I think AI systems, they have their own perspective on musical data because they learn to compose music, and they are good at it and hopefully very good at it in some years, but it is actually something that we can use as human artists and as professionals and amateurs to use this technology to collaborate with this technology and to make something new. And I'm sure that artists will use this technology in the next years for completely new projects. It wouldn't be the first time in music history that technology helps us to extend our possibilities. Even the piano, as it was invented in 18th century, was an invention, or even the first flute 40,000 years ago. It was also a part of humanity, because at that time the only way of making music was singing, and with the flutes it was. So a part of humanity was gone because they could use an instrument to make music, something that is dead. But I think the point is that only in collaboration it will be possible to make art with machines. So it is from a technological point of view, of course, it's very interesting if you have a machine and you can just press off the button and a masterpiece is generated. But if it's not possible now, but when it became a reality, but it's just a technological point of view. So from artistic point of view, I think it's really necessary that humans are involved. And I think for now they are used as tools, but actually the goal should be that they are used as counterparts, because if they have their own perspective on the data, so it would be good to share this perspective and to work with them, and not that they work for us. So I think it would extend our creativity, because AI systems, they see music in another way than us, because once an AI system is trained, so that the result is actually a frozen space of weights, and it's a space we can see it as a vector space, and composition is nothing else than navigating in this space. And I think it would be very interesting for composers to navigate in this space and to express themselves in different paths, and discover the musical universe using the systems.
Very cool. Thank you very much. Moisés?
Can you just repeat the question really quickly?
Yeah, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on where you see the role of the human with creativity and collaboration with AI.
Yeah, so the human is never going to go away in this narrative of artificial intelligence, in my opinion, right? So actually, artificial intelligence, like you're saying, I don't believe such a, let's say, productive approach. It's a very problematic word, but let's say I don't believe like artificial intelligence as another being in itself. I see it as a tool that, as you were saying, is more like something that can augment our limitations of time. For example, we can see patterns, because that's only what it does, right? It's a correlationist approach to knowledge. It's not really based on intelligence. If we look at the history of AI, it's people basically making the first the perceptron algorithm, which all of the current neural networks are based on, are basically a couple of scientists poking at a frog and seeing how it reacts. This has nothing to do with intelligence. So we have to kind of understand that. So it's like we have a correlationist approach to these systems, but it's really great, because now we can have like a wider understanding of a bigger corpus of human artistic creation, right? And your own artistic creation. And I think this is very valuable, because then you can have like insights that these systems provide that otherwise you probably would not be able to see. But I'm also quite skeptical, because I always think the AI itself is not going to produce anything interesting unless the human says, okay, this is what I want, this is interesting to me, this is playing into the history of music or art in general, and this is what I decide to put out. Not just like an autonomous system where it's just like 24/7 making some kind of art or music. This has the danger of becoming like music, becoming muzak. So becoming just something that is completely boring, you know. So I think this is the problematic, but also the benefit of AI, that it can help us look at patterns or aesthetics. Like I believe in the glitch aesthetics of AI and the disruptions of AI as the interesting thing of artificial intelligence, like any other technology, right? So like the failings of this, and it's also a very political view in my opinion, that the most interesting part is when AI fails, because then this is when the system is actually becoming interesting and producing something unexpected. Because if we're just expecting it to produce music in the sense that we think music is in itself, then we are just caught in this historical loop, right? So we're just trying to perpetuate the past. No, so this is kind of like where I stand in this, and like this is my approximation towards including indigenous epistemologies into this, because then you can bring about like a symbiosis of different perspectives, so like indigenous perspectives and modern capitalist perspectives, which we are all living in. So this is where I stand. So, and I think this has to do a lot with my own context of being growing up in a border city where you're like faced with these two epistemologies in tension. And so you always have to navigate, like basically this philosopher calls it border thinking, where you have to adapt to different ways of seeing of the world in order to survive. So this is kind of like my approach to this.
Very cool. Yeah, I feel like even an easier way to explain like this method of using AI, feeding it data and then having it create new data, is like kind of similar to sampling music, you know, like you listen to a whole bunch of music and then you chop up all this audio and then you create something with it. Or like an arpeggiator or some kind of sequencer, rarely would an artist just allow this thing to create and then whatever comes out, you put it out as like, this is the final product. There's a lot of curation that goes in, a lot of production, piecing things together. So I find that really, really interesting. And Alex,
yes.
Curious to know, I mean, you've already shared your very strong opinions about the importance of the role of the human.
Yes, but I have a very strong feeling that we need to bring the debate in the future to different borders and frontiers, because the don't believe the hype scheme, I think it applies really well to artificial intelligence for us as artists, meaning that if you ask me where artificial intelligence is going to go and where it's going to bring art and music, and I can answer, I don't know, but I could answer better, I don't care, because it would be like in the 50s talking to Leo Fender, which had invented a super amazing guitar, and telling him, where is the music going to go? Where is the guitar going to go? And he would have answered, I don't know, the guitar is going nowhere, it stays there. It depends on who takes the guitar. Yeah, you should talk to Jimi Hendrix, you should talk to Eric Clapton, you should talk to Yngwie Malmsteen, all these amazing users of Fender guitars that brought music to different borders and created a new form, a new language, a new universe. If you think about Bartolomeo Cristofori, for example, it's a name that I don't know. Does anybody know who he is?
I know.
I know you know, but you're the only one in this room that knows who Bartolomeo Cristofori is. He was the guy that invented the pianoforte, and it's completely forgotten. It just invented a new technology. But if you would have talked to him and said, oh, Bartolomeo, where is music going to go? I said, what the fuck do I know? I just invented a machine that is playing. Talk to Bach, because Bach took the invention and made it what we know. Talk to Mozart, talk to Beethoven, because they were the first masters of pianoforte, and they took music to a complete, they delivered us the universe. They delivered us the world, they delivered us love, they delivered us everything we know about our emotional fields. But technology is just a technology, and for us artists, I think we should quit focusing on the technology and start focusing on what we do with that technology, because not everything that comes out of an AI performance is something remarkable. Not everything coming out of an AI experimentation is something that has to be called art. Something is just experimentation, something is just data research, which is good, which is fine, but has nothing to do with art. So we should start switching. Now, AI is a given instrument now, and we should start focusing on that and shifting the debate on the artists. So you are not worth because you use AI. Your art is meaningful because what you do with AI is remarkable and comes out something that will stand out and will last in the years. So going back to your answer, where is AI taking the world? Where is AI taking music and art? No, where is mankind taking art through the use of the AI? And that is an answer that nobody has, because nobody knows what I'm going to do tomorrow, what Ali is going to do tomorrow, what Moisés is going to do tomorrow, what Artemi or you are going to do tomorrow with AI. It's just like questioning yourself, what is your next song with the piano? I don't know. It depends on who I meet today on the train. Who do I fall in love with? Why do I suffer today for some loss or some joy that I experience? And that translates into the universe that we as humans create through the use of a piano, through the use of a guitar, through the use of our voice or the AI. But that's just, as I was saying in the very beginning, that's just a super fast way of exploring all the endless possibilities that you have. But then you, as an artist, have to choose the right one. Otherwise, it's just a useless bunch of data that does not mean anything to anybody and will not last.
I think it's great how you highlight that perspective of kind of putting less pressure also of being an artist working with AI, because there's so much judgment that's happening. But the reality is that if you're putting any kind of art out into the world, you're going to be judged for your work regardless. And I do think that this is where the humanity with AI comes, where we get to, through our practice and through sharing all the very unique and specific ways that we're using it, being able to give people tangible experiences. Because I think for a lot of people, for most, it's still very abstract. And things start to make sense, and we start to create meanings with all of these intangible things once we have experiences of seeing an example or hearing an example and feeling. And that's where the human, our role is with all of this technology. They're tools, we use them, we help translate our emotions, the current state, the current limitations, and we push these limitations to new heights by understanding what the limitations are in the first place, right? So this was very revealing, and it's become very obvious that we all share this the same need to highlight how AI has proved to be simply tools to help us create, to inspire us, and there are unlimited possibilities, same as if you want to make music. There are just endless ways of creating. There's not just one way. So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts so far. We have just a few minutes left. So what would be your closing thoughts to the next musician who's interested in AI but is caught up in this fear, or I think there's also the entry point to get into AI and music creation is still quite a stiff entry point for most people. What kind of advice would you give to the next musician interested in working in this space?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. I guess from my own experience, I think it's really important to try to understand how these tools work and try to understand that as well as you can. So if you can code these things yourself, if you can program your own neural networks, then this is really a very good way of understanding the limitations, the problems, the mechanics, what these algorithms do, what they don't do. I think it's really important to get a very good understanding of the tools rather than to just use them very superficially to do a very specific task. And I think understanding these problems, these limitations, and the inner workings of the algorithms can also help you create better art. So this is not just about learning how to program, it's just about learning how they work so that you can use that in your art and not just avoid this kind of superficial use of AI as a very, tool now is a hard word in this context because we already said that AI is a tool, but yeah, I think it's really important to understand how it works to avoid using it in ways that don't bring your music forward, really.
Thank you. Any other thoughts?
Sure. Ali, do you want to go?
Yeah, very, very quickly. I just wanted to share your opinion, and I think it's very important to know that AI is a big chance for all artists because it wouldn't be the first time in the art history that technology, can extend our possibilities. But it is also important to be aware of limitations and to know exactly what it can give us and what it can't.
Thank you.
I mean, I would just recommend anybody who is interested in going to machine learning or AI start with like some very specific open source tools, such as like the Wekinator by Dr. Rebecca Fiebrink, which actually doesn't require any programming. And there's like a free course online on that. So I'm all about democratizing these technologies, making them really accessible, what they actually are doing and how you can incorporate into your artistic practice, not as something that is gonna make you hype or something like that, no? Like just because you're using AI, it's actually something that you can use for your own artistic ideas that should not be defined in terms of AI, right? Like you already have your artistic vision, and this is just like a new tool that you can incorporate. It's just like a new palette, no? Like a new color that you can incorporate, like that has the possibility of having aesthetics that are very unique on its own, like neural aesthetics some people are talking about. But yeah, I think it's like going into the deep research, into the boring kind of like you say, Artemi, like coding your own neural network. I think this is a really good approach. And yeah, just like I think there's like quite a bunch of communities online around like AI art. And I think this is a good approximation towards this, like get in touch with people who are working with these and have these insights within this, because then this democratizing is gonna help us like move forward, and then we're gonna be able to have like more interesting discussions, not like this tired discussion about like the mechanical Turk, basically, right? Like, you know, it's not about this, it's not about fooling ourselves that AI is another entity in itself. It's about using it in a concrete way, and what are we saying with this tool? So that's my perspective on that.
I think we kicked off a really exciting revolution in music and art. And for the first time in many years, there is something really new that we can walk into, which is a new way to produce art and music. Given this, that is a fact, my advice to any artist approaching this kind of new school is just master your technology first, and then take away the hype, get on stage, and ask yourself, am I doing something remarkable? Am I doing something that makes the difference? If the answer is yes, go on. Otherwise, step off the stage and do something else, because there's no need for more datas and more things to be put in a casual, in a chaotic way in the world. Because, as I was saying before, that is not art. So it's very simple and it's very black or white.
Thank you very much. I also think I would like to add, I feel like AI has this interesting ability to give us a much more intimate experience with our creations, and if we use it in such a way of feeding our own data of music that we've created and listening to how machines learn it, that alone has a very interesting, like, it serves as an interesting reflective tool. And I don't know if you feel the same way. I've had a few conversations where we share similar insights. And I think this is the really importance of artists playing with this technology and showcasing it, so that we give new narratives and a much wider perspective of all of this, and so that the hype doesn't just get kind of monopolized by one specific role in media. So I appreciate everyone's thoughts here and sharing your experiences. I hope that it's helped demystify some of this hype in a way. I know it's still very, it might be abstract still, but please check out everyone's work online. And also we have 3 performances right after this, back to back. Artemi, Ali, and Moisés are performing just outside on stage. Alex performed last night, and I believe everything should be online after for everyone to see. So thank you very much for helping make the invisible visible and the intangible tangible. Please give the panelists a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you.